Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. One Crack. Chief Architect Cathon had spent 93 years learning what failure looked like. It rattled before bearings seized. It drifted before guidance collapsed. It heated before conductors burned. Good engineering did not eliminate failure. It made failure announce itself early enough to matter. The Asterion Spire had been built around that principle. Every tension member was monitored. Every active gravitic compensator reported load in real time. Every major composite junction had multiple independent strain sensors embedded through its structure. The tower's control network compared those readings continuously against 3 centuries of operational history. So when Cathon received a maintenance alert from Junction 7 Blue, he expected an instrument problem. The alert was barely serious enough to interrupt his inspection tour. He arrived 12 minutes later with materials specialist Sadril Nam, 2 Athari technicians, and the visiting human engineering delegation that had been unfortunate enough to be standing beside him when the warning came through. Junction 7 Blue occupied a service chamber nearly 14 kilometers above Pelith's surface. The Asterion Spire continued upward beyond it until the tower disappeared into a blue-black sky and met the colossal orbital ring that depended on it for stabilization. The chamber itself was immaculate. No loose equipment, no corrosion, and no visible deformation. Then Sadril stopped. Cathon. The tone was wrong. Cathon followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then the light caught it, a crack, thin as a strand of dark hair. It ran across the pale metamaterial skin of a structural junction where 3 major load paths converged. Cathon moved closer. That is impossible. The human beside him made a quiet sound. Engineer Verity Caulfield. Cathon had known her for 4 days and had already learned that humans often produced noises when they were thinking. Verity crouched near the crack without touching it. How impossible. Cathon turned toward her. The local stress history contains no excursion capable of producing visible fracture. That's not what I asked. He disliked that answer immediately. Sadril raised a diagnostic wand and scanned the surface. Fracture depth is uncertain. The local material field is masking penetration. Cathon pulled up the structural model. Every displayed load remained green. The spire was stable. The junction carried only 62% of certified peak load. No anomalous gravitic compensation appeared nearby. Evacuate this deck, Cathon ordered. Reduce local transit loads by 10% and request a full imaging array from orbital maintenance. One technician acknowledged. Verity was still staring at the crack. How long until the imaging array gets here? Approximately 3 hours. And how long has the crack been that size? Cathon glanced at the alert record. The surface sensor registered it 11 minutes ago. That wasn't my question either. Cathon felt his patience thinning. We do not know. Verity nodded. So we don't know if it took 300 years to get that big or 3 minutes. The structure is continuously monitored. Apparently not continuously enough to tell us that. Before Cathon could respond, Verity opened the field bag hanging from her shoulder. She removed a marker, then a small roll of bright yellow tape. Cathon stared at it. The tape looked like something used to secure packaging. He knew humans possessed sophisticated materials science. He had personally reviewed several of their orbital composite systems. Why one of their structural engineers carried adhesive strips in a professional field bag remained a mystery. Verity held up the roll. Anyone mind if I use this? Cathon looked from the tape to the crack, then back to Verity. You intend to repair the Asterion Spire with adhesive fabric. Mercallis, the other human engineer, coughed into one hand. Verity looked offended. No. Then what are you doing? She tore off a strip. I'm asking the crack a question. Before Cathon could object, she laid the tape lightly across the fracture. Then she drew 3 narrow lines across it, extending each mark onto the material on both sides. She stood. There. Cathon stared at the yellow strip desecrating a structural junction older than the Human Federation membership. You consider that instrumentation? No. Verity capped the marker. I consider that immediate. Sadril crouched beside it. The Athari materials scientist tilted his head. If the fracture widens, the strip elongates. Verity nodded. If it shears, the marks move. K-Thun opened his mouth. The tape shifted. Barely. A line Verity had drawn across the center separated by less than a millimeter. Nobody spoke. Sadril scanned it. His upper hands froze over the diagnostic controls. The fracture is moving. K-Thun looked at the perfect green load display, then back at the crack. The model said the spire was stable. The tape disagreed. K-Thun triggered the emergency channel. Expand evacuation immediately. Suspend passenger ascent through the central shaft and bring the full structural team online. Verity crouched again. The yellow strip stretched another fraction. K-Thun suddenly found it less offensive. Chapter 2. Faster than the model. The crack did not grow steadily. That would have been easier. For almost 4 minutes it stopped. K-Thun's structural team flooded Junction 7 Blue with portable scanners. Surface interferometers measured microscopic displacement. Acoustic imagers listened for fracture propagation inside the metamaterial. Gravitic load sensors were recalibrated twice. Nothing explained the damage. Then the crack moved again. 0.3 of a millimeter, stopped, moved, stopped. K-Thun trusted failures that followed recognizable patterns. This one did not. Irregularity usually meant the system contained a variable no one had identified. Verity stood over a portable display with Sadril. Current load history, she said. K-Thun brought it up. A series of smooth curves appeared. Nothing exceeds nominal limits. Yeah, I can see that. Then what are you searching for? Verity enlarged the previous 6 hours. What's repeating? K-Thun folded 2 of his arms. Fatigue analysis already accounts for repeated loading. Great, show me the ugly parts. The what? Anything periodic enough to be annoying, but small enough that your software decided not to care. K-Thun looked at her. Merk muttered, she's like this with bridges too. Verity ignored him. Sadril began filtering the data differently. They removed the large structural cycles first. They removed the major cycles first. Transit movement, thermal expansion, and gravitic compensation caused by orbital traffic. Beneath them sat countless small oscillations. Most were meaningless. A tower this large was never perfectly still. Air moved against the lower structure. Elevators accelerated. Orbital docking altered the tension profile. Maintenance systems switched on and off. Then Verity tapped the display. That. K-Thun examined the trace. A faint load oscillation repeated every 19.3 seconds. Its amplitude was negligible, below reporting threshold. What's driving it? K-Thun queried the control network. No answer. The oscillation did not correspond to any scheduled spire mechanism. Verity looked toward the crack, tape intact. Then she looked back at the trace. 19 seconds. How long has that been happening? The system searched. K-Thun expected minutes. The answer came back, 37 hours. Sadril stiffened. That predates the fracture alert. Obviously, K-Thun said. Verity zoomed farther out. The oscillation had begun almost exactly when a minor docking incident occurred at the orbital ring. An incoming cargo tug had struck an external stabilization housing. The impact had caused negligible structural damage. The housing had been repaired, certified, returned to service. K-Thun remembered signing the maintenance summary. The orbital incident was resolved. Verity pointed at the repeating trace. Something didn't get the memo. Before K-Thun could answer, another alarm sounded. This one came from above, 206 meters above, Junction 7 Copper. Sadril opened the feed. A fresh fracture had appeared along a neighboring composite interface. K-Thun felt cold beneath his scales. The damage was migrating. He pulled up the active compensation network. The automated system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. As 7 Blue weakened, the Spire had redistributed load into adjacent members, perfectly, safely, according to a model that assumed the neighboring members were undamaged. Now 7 Copper was cracking. Verity saw it too. Your system's chasing the deformation. It is preserving global alignment and pushing load away from every place that complains. That is the purpose. Normally, K-Thun stared at the compensation map. Another actuator increased output near 7 Copper. The neighboring structural line accepted additional load. Sadril said quietly, if the local stiffness assumptions have changed. The control network could propagate the failure, K-Thun finished. The words tasted bitter. The most sophisticated safety system in the Spire might be accelerating the damage. K-Thun opened the emergency command channel. Stop all ascent traffic. Reduce ring docking load. Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from the upper spire. A controller answered from operations. Chief Architect, we have a passenger elevator already descending from the ring. K-Thun looked at its position, far above them, loaded. He calculated automatically. It continues down for now. Holding it in the upper mast produces greater static load. Acknowledged. Verity had turned back to the local control diagram. Can we disable this correction loop? K-Thun looked at her. No. Why? Because it stabilizes this section of the tower. I didn't ask if we could turn off the whole tower. She pointed. Can we stop this local region from correcting so aggressively? K-Thun stared at the output curves. The answer was technically yes. The idea was professionally obscene. He said, the spire will drift out of perfect alignment. Verity looked toward the growing crack, crooked and standing beats straight and falling. Merc nodded. She does have a point. K-Thun glared at both humans, then Sadril said, Chief. K-Thun looked at him. The Athari materials scientist highlighted another load increase. The automated system was redistributing again. K-Thun hated Verity's suggestion. He hated the alternative more. Damp local correction to manual limit, he ordered. The technicians hesitated. Chief, do it. The loop changed modes. The spire's alignment shifted by a microscopic but measurable amount. 3 warning indicators changed from green to amber. Amber meant the spire was no longer pretending everything was fine, and K-Thun found that unexpectedly reassuring. He watched the crack. 30 seconds, a minute, 2, the rate of growth slowed. Verity pointed at the tape. There's your answer. K-Thun said, it is not an answer. No. She looked at him. It's the next question. Chapter 3. 15 minutes. The certified reinforcement array would not arrive for 2 hours and 46 minutes. Junction 7 Blue did not have 2 hours and 46 minutes. Sadril, as updated fracture model, estimated that the damaged composite could continue carrying current load for between 18 minutes and 4 hours. K-Thun considered that range scientifically useless. Verity considered it a deadline. Can we bypass the junction? K-Thun pulled up the architecture. In principle. In practice. Primary bypass hardware is stored in orbital maintenance. Merc was already walking toward the service inventory. K-Thun followed reluctantly. The maintenance bay contained equipment intended to service elevators, tension cables, access platforms, and local gravitic actuators. None of it was designed to hold the Asterion Spire together. Merc looked delighted. K-Thun found that concerning. The human pointed at several cargo tensioners. Load rating. Sadril answered. Merc pointed at service frame beams. Those. Not certified for primary structural load. That wasn't the question. K-Thun made a sound of annoyance. Merc turned. Sorry, load rating. Sadril checked. Under axial compression, they could carry substantially more than their service rating. Good. Under bending, far less. Also good to know. Merc kept moving. They inventoried emergency elevator braces, composite maintenance cable, portable hydraulic jacks, and heavy clamps normally used to secure equipment frames during gravitic maintenance. Verity arrived carrying the fracture scans. We need something that catches enough of the load to slow this down. K-Thun said, a temporary structure attached incorrectly could concentrate stress and accelerate failure. Yes, you say that very calmly. Because that's why Sadril is here. The Athari materials scientist looked up. Verity pointed to the junction. You tell us where we can touch it without making it worse. Sadril studied the material map. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then he highlighted 4 attachment zones. Clamping pressure cannot exceed this limit. No penetrating fasteners. The composite skin must remain thermally isolated from any hydraulic contact surface. Merc nodded. What about this geometry? He sketched a triangular external frame, transferring part of the damaged junctions, load into 2 adjacent service members. Sadril rejected it immediately. The lower member will experience transverse load beyond tolerance. Merc erased the line. What if we carry it here? K-Thun leaned in despite himself. That section is stronger, but the angle creates torsion. Merck changed it again. Here. K-Thun calculated. Possibly. Verity looked at him. Possibly good or possibly fatal. Possibly acceptable. Great. K-Thun disliked how quickly humans could convert uncertainty into enthusiasm. They built. Maintenance crews stripped 2 service frame beams from a non-critical access structure. Merck cut and reconfigured connection plates. Sadril checked every clamping surface. Verity attached portable displacement sensors and, to K-Thun's irritation, another strip of yellow tape across the fracture. K-Thun finally asked, "Why both?" "Sensors tell me how much." She pointed at the tape. "That tells me instantly whether something changed badly enough that I should stop staring at a screen." The bypass frame went up around the junction. It was hideous. The beams did not match the spire's architecture. Cargo tensioners crossed one another at inelegant angles. Temporary sensor cables ran visibly along the wall. K-Thun wanted to dismantle it on aesthetic grounds alone. Merck tightened the final load line. Ready. K-Thun looked at Sadril. Material limits. Acceptable if preload remains below 6%. K-Thun looked at Verity. She had one hand on the tension controller. Take 2% first. She did. The frame loaded. The crack movement slowed. 3. Merck increased tension. The frame groaned. The crack stopped. For 8 glorious minutes, nothing happened. K-Thun felt something dangerously close to relief. Then Verity's yellow tape tore, not completely. A tiny split appeared across the center. Verity's expression hardened. "That's not us." K-Thun looked at the load monitor. The bypass frame was carrying exactly what they expected. She pointed at the 19-second oscillation. It was still there. The temporary structure had reduced the consequence. It had not removed the cause. Merck looked toward the ceiling, still coming from upstairs. K-Thun opened the ring systems map. The repeating load moved through the spire like a faint heartbeat. 19.3 seconds. The pulse repeated with mechanical regularity. K-Thun turned toward operations. "Get me full telemetry from the repaired orbital stabilizer." Verity peeled the torn tape away. "Permanent S going to have to wait." Merck picked up his tools. "Permanent is a wonderful goal." He looked at K-Thun. "Right now I'm aiming for 15 minutes. K-Thun would once have rejected the sentence as irresponsible. With the crack still moving, he understood exactly what Merck meant. He also began to understand it. Chapter 4. The wrong repair. The orbital stabilization array had been repaired correctly. That was the problem. K-Thun reviewed the maintenance record twice before accepting it. The cargo tug impact had damaged one external actuator housing. Technicians replaced the housing, recalibrated the assembly, and ran a complete certification cycle. Every individual parameter fell inside tolerance. Force output was correct, thermal behavior was correct, phase lag was acceptable, and synchronization error was negligible. Verity stared at the phase data. There. K-Thun saw it. One actuator lagged behind the others by less than 1/10 of a second during part of its correction cycle. The error was tiny, still within certification. Every 19.3 seconds, however, that lag aligned with a natural structural mode in the upper spire. The result was not a large force. It did not need to be. The actuator pushed, the tower flexed, the active control system corrected, and the actuator pushed again. For 37 hours, the process repeated. Sadril ran a fatigue simulation using the newly identified cycle. The model changed. The output disturbed even Verity. K-Thun stared at the damage forecast. So every component is operating within certified limits. "Yes," Sadril said, "and the combined system is failing." "Yes." For a moment, K-Thun wanted the numbers to be wrong simply because every individual system had passed its tests. Verity did not. "How fast can we change the actuator timing?" "Repair requires orbital access." "I didn't ask about repair." K-Thun looked at her. She pointed at the control cycle. "Detune it." Sadril immediately understood. "We alter the interval enough that the impulse no longer reinforces the same structural mode." K-Thun considered the ring. "The stabilization array depends on coordinated timing." "Then don't break coordination," Verity said. "Break this rhythm." K-Thun brought up the control limits. The actuator could be commanded to cycle earlier or later within a narrow range without compromising ring position. Sadril calculated 3 candidate offsets. The first might excite another mode. Rejected. The second placed excess thermal load on the repaired unit. Rejected. The third reduced efficiency but disrupted the 19-second structural resonance. K-Thun authorized it. The array changed timing. They watched Junction 7 blue. The repeating load weakened, not vanished, weakened. Verity listened to the structure through an acoustic sensor. Again. The actuator cycled. The tower flexed, less, again, less. Sadril said, "Resonant amplification is decaying." K-Thun allowed himself one breath of relief. Then operations called. "Chief Architect, passenger elevator Oralia 4 is approaching upper transfer." K-Thun looked at the elevator's mass. His relief disappeared. Oralia 4 was one of the largest passenger carriers on the Spire. Tens of thousands of people aboard. It had departed the orbital ring before the emergency shutdown. Stopping it now would leave that mass suspended above the damaged zone for hours. Bringing it down would send a major load transfer through 7 blue. K-Thun ran the numbers with the temporary bypass in place. The result was red. Merk leaned over his shoulder. How red? The bypass frame will exceed safe load. By how much? Enough. Verity checked the elevator's position. Can we move it sideways? No. Unload it. No. Park it somewhere else. The nearest structural bay capable of holding it is below us. Merk looked at the service architecture, then began pointing. That frame, that one, those 2 girders, what do they support? K-Thun knew that look now. I am going to regret answering. Verity glanced at him. Probably. Chapter 5. Borrowed structure. The Asterion Spire began to look human. K-Thun would once have considered that a structural insult. Service decking disappeared first. Maintenance crews removed walkway sections to expose frame members that could be recruited into the temporary load path. Merk redirected emergency elevator braces. Composite cargo tensioners crossed spaces previously reserved for access, and hydraulic jacks appeared beneath beams never intended to carry structural preload. Nothing violated material limits. That was largely because Sadril refused to allow it. Merk proposed anchoring a tension line to an adjacent composite rib. Sadril studied the geometry for 2 seconds. No. Merk asked, too weak. Strong enough, wrong load direction. You will delaminate the internal metamaterial layers. Good catch. Merk erased the line without argument. K-Thun noticed that. An Athari engineer who presented a structural proposal normally defended the calculation through several review stages. The humans seemed oddly comfortable abandoning their own ideas. Verity suggested moving one hydraulic brace 20 centimeters. K-Thun stopped her. That will interfere with gravitic actuator clearance. She looked right. No embarrassment, no argument, she moved it elsewhere. K-Thun began to understand that human improvisation was not confidence that every idea would work. It was confidence that ideas could be tested quickly enough to find one that did. Sadril checked another clamp. Acceptable. Merk tightened it. K-Thun inspected the evolving structure. Your lower load line remains asymmetric. Merk nodded, I know. That creates additional lateral moment. Yep. You intend to leave it. Unless you have somewhere better to put it. K-Thun looked again. There was, barely. He pointed to an unused maintenance boss on the neighboring service frame. If you redirect through there, the lateral moment drops by approximately 11%. Merk grinned. Now you're improvising. I am correcting your geometry. Whatever helps you sleep. K-Thun's lower jaw tightened. Verity hid a smile. The temporary reinforcement grew. A secondary load path now stretched around 7 blue like an exoskeleton. It could not replace the damaged junction. It might keep the junction from receiving the worst of Oralia 4's passing load. Might. Sadril finished the final model. Peak predicted stress remains above preferred temporary limit. How far? Verity asked. 8%. Merk rubbed his face. Can we preload the upper brace? K-Thun considered, possibly. Verity looked at him, possibly acceptable. K-Thun disliked hearing his own earlier phrase return to him. Yes. They adjusted, peak stress dropped, still high. Then operations reported the elevator had crossed the upper checkpoint, 23 minutes. Verity put a fresh strip of yellow tape across the original crack. K-Thun looked at it. She caught him. What? You possess actual displacement sensors. Yes. And yet you continue using that. Also yes. K-Thun wanted to object. Instead he said, mark the edges more clearly. Verity paused, then handed him the marker. K-Thun stared at it. Merc made a suspicious coughing sound. K-Thun ignored him. He drew 2 precise reference marks. Verity examined them. Beautiful. They are calibration marks. Of course. Orlia 4 descended. The tower waited. Chapter 6. Human Engineering. The first load increase arrived as a vibration through K-Thun's feet. Not dangerous. Yet, Orlia 4 was still several kilometers above them, but its mass was already transferring through the Spire's tension network. The temporary reinforcement began taking load. Sadril watched the metamaterial stress display. Merc watched the bypass frame. Verity watched everything. K-Thun stood at the central control station with manual authority over the local gravitic correction loop. He had never operated the Asterion Spire this way. The tower was designed to correct itself faster and more precisely than any biological operator could. Now the automatic system remained constrained because its precision had become part of the problem. Load line 2 increasing, Merc said. Sadril answered, within limit. Line 4. Stable. K-Thun watched the gravitic compensation. Orlia 4 reached the next transition zone. The Spire groaned. K-Thun had worked inside the tower for decades. He had heard elevators, he had heard thermal movement, he had heard tension members settle after docking cycles. He had never heard the structure groan like that. Verity looked at the yellow tape, still intact. One cargo tensioner suddenly jumped 3%. Merc moved immediately. Secondary line, tighten half a turn. An Athari technician obeyed. Sadril checked the load. Better. Another brace approached limit. Verity pointed at a local compensator. Can you unload us 2%? K-Thun calculated. If I reduce here, I push load into 7 copper. How much margin does copper have? Sadril answered, enough for 1.3%. K-Thun adjusted by 1. The brace relaxed. Verity nodded. That's enough. Orlia 4 moved lower. The temporary frame began making small metallic clicks. K-Thun hated everyone. Merc crouched beside a service beam. This isn't carrying what we modeled. Sadril checked. Confirmed, cable 3 is underloaded. K-Thun looked at the geometry. The cable should have been taking nearly twice its current load. Verity put one hand against the service beam. She felt the vibration. It's flexing. Merc swore the beam was bending before the cable engaged fully. The load path they had designed existed on paper. The actual structure was avoiding it. K-Thun looked at the countdown. Orlia 4 would reach maximum transfer in less than 2 minutes. Can we move the cable? Merc shook his head, not in time. Verity pointed at the hydraulic jacks beneath the beam. Preload it. Sadril snapped his head toward her. How much? Enough to take the flex out before the next pulse. K-Thun ran the calculation. The result was marginal, too marginal for certified procedure. Possible, Merc said, Chief. K-Thun stared at the beam. He had spent his entire career avoiding decisions with insufficient data. Now insufficient data was all he had. Sadril looked at him. Material can tolerate it if jack force remains under this value. He sent the number. K-Thun authorized it. Do it. Merc and 2 technicians engaged the hydraulic jacks. The beam rose by a fraction. Cable 3 tightened. Its load climbed. Stop, Sadril said. They stopped. Verity watched the displacement graph. Again, smaller. K-Thun checked. Proceed. Another fraction. The cable loaded. The bypass frame redistributed. Then the next elevator load pulse arrived. Everything moved. The yellow tape stretched. Verity's eyes locked onto it. How much? Sadril checked. Crack opening increased 4/10. Still accelerating. A second measurement? No. Merc shouted from the frame. Clamp 5 is slipping. K-Thun turned. One temporary clamp had shifted visibly along a service member. Sadril moved before anyone else. Do not tighten directly. The contact surface is at compression limit. Merc stopped with the tool already in his hand. What do you want? Sadril looked around. Secondary restraint looped behind the maintenance boss. Merc grabbed a composite strap. Together, human and Athari fed it through. The clamp shifted again, a centimeter, then the strap caught. Oralia 4 kept descending, 90 seconds to maximum load. K-Thun could hear his own breathing. Chapter 7. Hold it. The temporary bypass frame had become a machine nobody had designed. That realization struck K-Thun as strangely comforting. No single person could claim authorship. Merc had built the original skeleton. Sadril had defined what the metamaterial would tolerate. Verity had changed the load paths as reality contradicted the model. K-Thun had altered gravitic compensation to keep the whole obscene arrangement within survivable margins. Now every part depended on the others. 60 seconds, operations announced. Orlia 4 entered the damaged region. The floor moved, not much, enough. K-Thun watched 7 copper, stress climbed. He reduced local compensation at blue and shifted a fraction toward a lower structural line. Sadril said, hold there. K-Thun held. Merc shouted, upper tensioner at 91%. Verity looked at the frame. Can line 2 take more? Maybe 4%. Do it. Merc transferred load. The upper tensioner eased. The fresh tape across the crack stretched farther. K-Thun stared at the marks he had drawn. They remained aligned, opening not shear, better than the alternative, 45 seconds. A hydraulic jack began losing pressure. Merc reached for the controls. Sadril stopped him. Seal temperature is rising. If we lose preload, cable 3 unloads. I know. Verity looked at the nearby maintenance circuit. Can we feed the second jack from the service accumulator? K-Thun checked. Pressure mismatch. Merc said regulator. An Athari technician held one up. Merc almost laughed. Of course you people have a certified regulator for this. K-Thun snapped, use it. They connected the accumulator. Pressure stabilized. 30 seconds. Oralia 4's mass crossed directly through the load zone. Every structural display turned amber. One turned red. K-Thun's hand hovered over the emergency release. If the load exceeded final safety limit, he would have to order the elevator stopped despite the consequences. Sadril read the material state. Composite strain high but stable. Merc said frame holding. Verity watched the tape, still moving. K-Thun asked, accelerating. No. 20 seconds. A noise like a distant thunderclap moved through the spire. Everyone froze. K-Thun checked the structural map. No new fracture. One temporary service beam had shifted into its stop. Merc exhaled. That's ours. K-Thun did not find that reassuring. 10 seconds. The load peaked. For a terrible moment, nothing changed. Then the numbers began falling. Orlia 4 had passed below junction 7 blue. The spire transferred its weight downward. 7 copper eased. The temporary frame creaked once more. The yellow tape stopped stretching. K-Thun waited. 5 seconds. 10. No movement. Merc sat down directly on the floor. He pointed at the strip. Still there. K-Thun looked at him. That is not an engineering certification. Verity leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Nope. She looked at the intact tape. But it's a pretty good sign. Someone laughed. Then another person did. K-Thun realized the sound was coming from him. He stopped immediately. Merc looked delighted. Did you just laugh? No. Sounded like passenger elevator status. Operations answered. Orlia 4 has cleared the damaged zone. All passengers safe. Continuing descent. K-Thun closed his eyes. For the first time since the crack appeared, he allowed himself to believe the spire might survive. Then Verity said, we're not done. K-Thun opened his eyes again. She pointed at the bypass frame. Everything we've got here is temporary. We're borrowing time. K-Thun looked at the clock. The certified orbital repair array was 41 minutes away. For the first time, 41 minutes sounded short. Chapter 8. Questions. The spire stabilized after Orlia 4 passed. Not healed, stabilized. That distinction had become important to K-Thun. The 19-second resonance was gone. The temporary bypass kept load away from the worst of 7 blue. 7 copper remained damaged but stable. Passenger traffic had stopped. Orbital docking had been reduced to emergency operations. The immediate failure cascade had been interrupted. K-Thun should have felt satisfied. Instead, he watched Verity walk the service chamber with a marker. She drew numbers beside temporary components. She numbered the temporary components directly, 1 on a tension line, 2 on a jack, 3 on a clamp. What are you doing? Making sure nobody forgets what's temporary. That is obvious. She looked at the structure. Is it? K-Thun followed her gaze. The bypass frame looked increasingly deliberate. A temporary structure that survived long enough had a dangerous way of beginning to look permanent. Verity tapped one of the cargo tensioners. Temporary repairs become dangerous when everyone gets used to them. K-Thun nodded. That at least sounded like proper engineering. He opened a maintenance log. Every modification had already been recorded. Merck had documented component ratings. Sadril had attached material limits. Verity had noted which changes were empirical and which were model verified. K-Thun stared at the records. You documented all of this while working. Merck looked up. Of course. K-Thun had assumed human improvisation meant neglecting procedure. Apparently, human improvisation did not discard procedure. It changed the order in which procedure happened. The sequence was simple. Stabilize first, document while stabilizing, then certify afterward. Verity caught his expression. What? I had expected your records to be less complete. She smiled slightly. You thought we were just bolting random junk to your tower. You were bolting random junk to my tower. Carefully selected junk. Merck raised a hand. Very important distinction. K-Thun looked at the yellow tape. What else do you use that for? Verity opened her field bag. K-Thun regretted asking. Depends. Holding sensor leads, marking movement, temporary labels, dust protection, keeping a cover closed, making sure someone notices a sharp edge. You carry multiple kinds. Yes. Why? Different adhesive, different backing, different temperatures. K-Thun stared. There was engineering even in the tape. Verity handed him the bright yellow roll. This one's mostly for visibility and quick checks. You wouldn't want it near a hot surface. K-Thun turned it over. Specifications were printed inside the core. Temperature range, adhesive strength, elongation before failure. He looked at her. You selected this particular tape because its stretch characteristics would reveal crack movement. Partly. It was also the brightest. Merck laughed. K-Thun returned the roll. He was beginning to suspect human engineering contained more layers than he had credited. Chapter 9. The permanent repair. The orbital repair array arrived 38 minutes later. K-Thun had never been so pleased to see something certified. The equipment docked against the upper service shaft and unfolded with beautiful precision. Metamaterial imaging systems mapped the full fracture network. Replacement structural shells were fabricated to exact geometry. Active load supports attached at prevalidated points. The temporary human bypass remained in place while the permanent system gradually accepted load. K-Thun returned to familiar territory. He directed the repair with confidence. Sadril supervised material replacement. Athari technicians calibrated each new interface. Verity and Merck stayed. They did not insist on controlling the process. That surprised K-Thun again. Once the emergency had become stable enough for proper engineering, the humans seemed perfectly happy to let proper engineering take over. Merck helped remove temporary supports. Verity monitored the crack, while load shifted into the new structure. The yellow tape came off last. K-Thun found himself watching it. Sadril noticed. You expect it to move. No. Then why are you watching? K-Thun ignored him. The new structural shell loaded. 7 Blue held. The damaged metamaterial was removed section by section and replaced. The orbital actuator received a complete recalibration, this time with system-level resonance testing rather than individual component certification alone. K-Thun personally added the new procedure. The total repair lasted 11 hours. When it ended, Asterion Spire's structural model returned to green. Proper green, verified, tested. K-Thun stood inside Junction 7 Blue after the last temporary beam was removed. The chamber looked elegant again, almost. One yellow adhesive mark remained on the wall where Verity had labeled the original crack. She noticed him looking. I can clean that. K-Thun considered, no. Verity raised an eyebrow. It is not structural contamination. It is a reference mark. Merck looked at Sadril. Sadril wisely said nothing. K-Thun walked toward the exit. Behind him, Verity asked, "You keeping the tape mark for sentimental reasons?" K-Thun stopped. "No. Historic documentation." "Yes. Sure." K-Thun turned. "Engineer Caulfield." She smiled. He pointed at her. "Do not." She lifted both hands innocently. He left before she could say anything else. Chapter 10. The Investigation. 3 days after the Spire reopened, K-Thun chaired the failure investigation. This was the part humans often forgot when telling stories about emergencies. Saving the structure was not the end. Now they had to determine why it had nearly failed and make sure it never happened again. The investigation took place in a formal Athari engineering chamber. Verity wore a clean uniform. Merc had somehow found a way to look untidy anyway. Sadril presented the materials analysis. The original junction had not contained a manufacturing flaw. The metamaterial had performed within design expectations. The orbital actuator repair had also been technically compliant. No individual technician had committed an error serious enough to explain the event. The failure emerged from interaction. A repaired actuator operating within tolerance had produced a tiny periodic phase mismatch. The Spire's active compensation system responded correctly. The combined cycle happened to align with a structural mode that had never appeared under certification testing because no previous operating state had produced that exact pattern. Repeated loading caused fatigue. The first crack altered stiffness. The automated compensator redistributed load. That transfer accelerated secondary damage. Each system had behaved correctly. Together, they nearly destroyed the Spire. K-Thun hated that kind of failure. There was nobody useful to blame. Verity seemed almost relieved. "Means you get to fix the system instead of a person." K-Thun looked at her. "You say that as if disciplinary responsibility is undesirable. When it's deserved, fine. When it isn't, blaming somebody just makes everyone afraid to report weird things." K-Thun considered the statement. The investigation board proposed new system-level resonance monitoring. K-Thun approved it. They proposed additional emergency load bypass hardware at major junctions. Approved. Manual damped modes for active compensators. Approved. Sadril proposed portable crack instrumentation stored on each engineering deck. Approved. Then Merc raised a hand. K-Thun looked at him suspiciously. "Yes. Emergency kits need basic field supplies. They already possess tools. Not human tools." K-Thun narrowed his eyes. Verity quietly covered her mouth. Merc continued. "Markers, visible strain tags, fiber straps, chalk, quick clamps, tape." An Athari board member looked confused. "Tape." K-Thun closed all four eyes. He could already feel the meeting getting longer. Chapter 11. The Debate About Tape. The debate lasted 47 minutes. K-Thun considered this 46 minutes too long. One faction argued that adhesive materials had no place in certified structural emergency kits because technicians might misuse them. Another argued that any tool could be misused. Sadril, to K-Thun's betrayal, sided with the humans. The visual strip provided the first evidence that 7 Blue was actively moving. A board member replied, "Portable displacement sensors would have provided higher quality data." "Yes," Sadril said, "after installation and calibration." Verity spoke next. "The tape didn't replace the sensor. It told us we needed the sensor now." K-Thun heard his own understanding reflected in the sentence. The yellow strip had not been a repair. It had been a question. Is the crack moving? Yes. Everything after that followed. K-Thun finally ended the debate. "Include the material." Several board members looked at him. He continued. "Clearly label it non-structural, provide approved uses." Merc smiled. K-Thun pointed at him. "If I ever find adhesive tape listed as a load-bearing component on an Asterion maintenance record, I will personally remove you from the Spire." "Understood." Verity leaned toward Merc. "Worth it." K-Thun heard her. He decided not to respond. The revised emergency kit passed unanimously. That should have been the end of the matter. It was not. Human engineers, K-Thun discovered, considered institutional adoption of their habits a form of entertainment. Chapter 12. A different kind of precision. Months passed. Asterion Spire returned to normal service. Passenger elevators climbed. Cargo descended. The orbital ring rotated overhead. The new monitoring network tracked system-level resonance continuously, nothing cracked. K-Thun resumed his ordinary work. Ordinary work felt more valuable now. Verity remained on Pelith as part of the follow-up engineering exchange. She and Sadril collaborated on field stabilization protocols. Merck returned to orbital construction after helping design standardized temporary bypass modules. K-Thun occasionally found himself using human language. He once told a technician that a repair was good enough for now. The technician stared at him. K-Thun immediately amended the phrase to temporarily acceptable within specified limits. Verity heard about it anyway. Human information networks were disturbingly efficient when gossip was involved. One afternoon, she found K-Thun reviewing emergency simulation results. "You know what I think your people misunderstood about us?" K-Thun continued reading. "I suspect you are going to tell me." "We're not less precise." K-Thun looked up. "That is debatable. We're precise about different things when the clock is ugly." She pointed toward the simulation. "Normal engineering asks, what is the correct solution? Emergency engineering sometimes has to ask, what is the safest, useful thing we can do in the next 30 seconds? K-Thun considered, "That can still be calculated." "Sure, if you've got the 30 seconds. And if you do not, then you use judgment." K-Thun disliked that answer less than he once would have. Verity tapped the table. "Then you measure what happened and update." K-Thun remembered the crack. He remembered the sequence clearly: tape, frame, failed assumptions, resonance, detuning, borrowed structure, and hydraulic preload. Every step incomplete, every step buying the next. He said, "You do not have to know whether the first intervention solves everything." Verity smiled. "We need to know what it changes." K-Thun looked at her. "That is a dangerously human sentence." "Thanks." It was not praise. Still taking it. Chapter 13. Emergency Equipment. The new Asterion emergency kits arrived 7 months after the incident. K-Thun inspected the first one personally. He trusted procurement. He trusted certification. He also trusted inspection. The case unfolded into 3 layers. The case held portable strain sensors, optical displacement tools, composite-safe clamps, emergency tension fiber, hydraulic spreaders and jacks, manual interfaces for the local Gravitic control network, markers, chalk, cord, wedges, and several rolls of brightly colored adhesive tape. Several rolls. K-Thun stared at them. Sadril stood beside him. "Is that now certified structural equipment?" K-Thun stiffened. "Absolutely not." Sadril waited. K-Thun removed one roll, read the specification, returned it. Then added another roll from the supplemental box. Sadril's mouth twitched. K-Thun said, "It is certified question-asking equipment." A voice behind them said, "That's going on a shirt." K-Thun turned. Verity stood in the doorway carrying a tablet. He pointed at her. "Do not." She smiled. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "Possibly." K-Thun narrowed his eyes. Verity approached and handed him one final roll. This one was bright orange. Better visibility in low light. K-Thun examined the specifications. Higher temperature adhesive. Good elongation, clean removal. He placed it in the kit. Verity said nothing for almost 5 full seconds. K-Thun appreciated the effort. Chapter 14. Tuesday. The revised emergency procedures were tested during a full-scale simulation the following year. The scenario involved a fictional fracture in an upper junction, loss of automatic compensation, and a passenger load already committed to descent. K-Thun observed from the control room. Athari engineers responded. They evacuated the local deck, placed portable sensors, switched the control system into damped manual mode, built a temporary bypass using standardized hardware. One technician crossed the simulated crack with a bright strip of tape and marked it. K-Thun saw Verity watching from the opposite side of the room. She noticed his gaze. "Don't." K-Thun looked away. The team stabilized the fictional failure 22 minutes ahead of the required deadline. No improvised service girders, no desperate hydraulic preload, no actual danger. The purpose of the exercise was not to celebrate improvisation. It was to turn the lessons learned under pressure into preparation, so the next crew would need less improvisation in the first place. K-Thun considered that proper engineering. When the simulation ended, one young Authari technician approached him. Chief Architect. Yes, I studied the original incident. Cathun knew what was coming. The technician held up the tape roll. Did Engineer Caulfield truly request this before the full diagnostic array? Yes. And you permitted it? Eventually. The technician looked toward Verity. Was that standard human procedure? Cathun answered before she could, no. Verity frowned. Then Cathun continued. Standard human procedure appears to be recognizing that the standard procedure has become insufficient and inventing a temporary one before reality becomes worse. Verity looked genuinely surprised. Cathun found that satisfying. The young technician asked, what do humans call that? Verity recovered. Depends how bad the problem is. Merck's voice came over the remote link from orbit. If nobody's bleeding, probably Tuesday. The control room laughed. Cathun tried not to. He failed. This time he did not deny it. Epilogue. Still there. Years later, visitors to Asterion Spire sometimes asked about the small yellow line preserved beneath transparent protective coating at Junction 7 Blue. Most assumed it marked the location of the original fracture. That was only partly true. The permanent repair had replaced the damaged material entirely. The line survived because Cathun had ordered the wall section preserved. Officially, it was an engineering history reference marker. Verity continued insisting he had become sentimental. Cathun continued denying it. One afternoon, during a routine inspection, he found a group of apprentice engineers studying the mark. Their instructor explained the failure. Their instructor explained the resonance, the cascading compensation, the temporary bypass, and the passenger elevator that had forced the structure through its worst load case. Then one apprentice asked, is it true the first diagnostic tool was tape? Cathun stopped behind them. The instructor hesitated. Cathun answered, no. They turned. He pointed toward the modern sensor suite mounted nearby. The first diagnostic tools were 90 years of structural knowledge, experienced observation, and the willingness to notice when the model disagreed with reality. The apprentices listened carefully. Then Cathun looked at the preserved yellow mark. The tape simply asked the first useful question. One apprentice smiled. Cathun continued down the corridor. Behind him, the Asterion Spire hummed with the quiet, precise confidence of a structure that had survived its worst day. Still there, because someone had noticed the first crack before the model understood what it meant.